Have you ever stopped to wonder what truly makes old age meaningful? Is it simply the absence of illness or the slowing down of time? Or could it be something deeper, something that exists beyond our physical state and the inevitable passage of years? We often hear that aging comes with loneliness, loss of purpose, and invisibility. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that these challenges are inevitable, that growing old means fading away into the background. But is that the whole story? Buddhism teaches us that peace does not come from the number of years we live, but from how we live them. It's not about fighting the aging process, but embracing the wisdom, the grace, and the deep understanding of ourselves that come with it. Aging is not a curse. It's an opportunity to grow into something richer and more meaningful. So in this video, I invite you to take a fresh perspective and explore with me 6 simple yet profound elements that can transform the later years of our lives. These are not just survival tactics. They are keys to living with dignity, joy, and purpose. Let's delve into them through the lens of Buddhist philosophy and uncover how we can all age not just gracefully, but purposefully. 1. The presence of a purposeful routine. There's something deeply comforting about routine. It's like a soft melody that plays gently in the background of our days, giving structure and meaning to the simplest moments. But as we age, the rhythm of our lives can start to falter. The alarm clock goes silent, the commute to work ends, and the days start to blend into one another. Without purpose, the minutes feel longer, the hours heavier, and before we know it, we start asking ourselves, what am I really doing here? The Buddha spoke often about mindfulness, about being present in the moment, but he also emphasized something more profound, the importance of intention in everything we do. When we move through life with intention, with purpose, every task, no matter how small, becomes a doorway to peace. Take Ruth, for example. Ruth had spent her life teaching children, nurturing young minds, and raising her family. But when she retired, she felt an odd emptiness creeping in. At first it felt like freedom, no more deadlines, no more rushing around. But as the weeks passed, she began to feel as if time itself had slipped away. She would wake up, have breakfast, and then nothing. The day would drag, and the quiet of the house grew overwhelming. Ruth realized something she hadn't fully understood before. She needed something to anchor her days, to give them meaning. It wasn't about grand goals or big accomplishments. It was about the small, purposeful actions, planting her garden every morning, writing in her journal, calling a friend, reading a new chapter each day. Buddhism teaches us that life is a series of fleeting moments, and the only way to truly live them is with purpose. It's not about keeping busy for the sake of it, but about finding meaning in each action. A purposeful routine doesn't need to be complicated. A simple cup of tea brewed with care, a walk in the park to clear the mind, or even organizing a drawer can bring a sense of accomplishment and peace. These small actions are like stepping stones across a vast river, each one bringing us closer to the shore of inner fulfillment. So, ask yourself today, what's your routine built around? Is it simply a series of tasks you've always done, or is it a reflection of your values, of what truly matters to you? You might find that by bringing purpose to even the smallest things, like sitting down to have a meal, or choosing to read a page from a book each morning, you can bring a sense of order to your life, something that nourishes your spirit and brings you peace. In the end, it's not about how busy we are, but about how intentionally we live. And in that intention, there is a quiet, profound joy. 2. The habit of maintaining physical vitality. As the years go by, our bodies change. There's no denying that. We feel it in the creak of our joints, the slower pace of our steps, the occasional ache that wasn't there yesterday. But here's the thing, our bodies are not just physical vessels, they are sacred temples that carry us through life. And the way we care for them directly impacts our emotional and spiritual well-being. The Buddha, in his teachings, always reminded his followers of the importance of balance. A balanced life is not one of extremes, neither indulgence nor deprivation, but of thoughtful, consistent care. Just as we care for our minds through meditation and mindfulness, so too should we care for our bodies. The Buddha didn't teach us to seek perfection, but to live with awareness. And that includes being aware of the needs of our physical selves. Let me share the story of Harold. Harold was once the picture of vitality, a man who loved to hike, swim and work in his garden. But after a health setback, Harold stopped moving as much. Just a few weeks of inactivity, he thought. But those weeks turned into months, and soon simple tasks, like going to the store or climbing the stairs, became daunting. His muscles weakened, his joints stiffened, and the man who had once felt so strong and alive now found himself feeling fragile. He didn't want to admit it, but he began to lose confidence in his body. One day, a friend invited Harold to go for a short walk. At first, Harold was hesitant. He feared he wouldn't be able to keep up, that it might be too much. But something within him whispered, "What if I just take one step?" So he did, and then another, and with each step, something shifted. His body remembered what it was capable of. Slowly, Harold began to reintroduce small, consistent movements into his life. Gentle stretching in the mornings, a short walk after dinner, light resistance exercises with a band. These small efforts, so simple and so unassuming, began to make a profound difference. Buddhism teaches that life is change, and change can be both beautiful and challenging. As our bodies age, we may not have the strength or stamina we once did, but that does not mean we are powerless. In fact, the power lies in our ability to adapt. Small, consistent habits, 10 minutes of stretching, gentle walks, standing leg lifts while brushing our teeth, help us stay engaged with life. They remind us that we are still part of the flow, still present in the world, still capable of contributing, even in our own quiet way. The truth is, your body is not a burden to be carried, but a companion that has walked with you through all the moments of your life. And just like any good companion, it deserves care and respect. When you move, when you make the choice to engage with your body, you send a powerful message to your spirit. I am still here. I still have something to offer. So take a moment today to think about your body, not as something that is slowing down, but as something that is still capable of great things. What small habit can you introduce into your day? A few minutes of stretching, a short walk around the block. Remember, it's not about doing what you did in the past. It's about moving with intention, with care, and with gratitude for the body that has carried you this far. And as you do, you'll find that your mind and spirit follow, growing stronger, more resilient, and more connected to the world around you. 3. The presence of emotional connection with others. As we journey through life, one of the most profound truths we learn is that we are not meant to walk this path alone. The Buddha often spoke about the importance of Sangha, the community of like-minded individuals who support and uplift one another. In old age, it's easy to feel as though the world has become smaller, that the people we once relied on are no longer as close, or that our voices have become quieter in the chorus of life. The phone calls become fewer, the visits more distant, and before long we find ourselves feeling like invisible figures in a world that seems to be moving on without us. Take Ruth, for instance. Ruth had lived a full life, surrounded by family and friends. She had been the glue that held her community together, organizing events, lending a listening ear, always there for those who needed her. But after her husband passed away and her children started their own lives, something began to change. Slowly, without her realizing it, her world grew quieter. Her friends moved away. Her children were busy with their own families, and Ruth found herself sitting alone more often than not. It wasn't just the silence that bothered her. It was the feeling that she had somehow faded into the background. Her stories no longer had a place to land, and her laughter, once so vibrant, seemed to echo only in her memories. This is where the teachings of the Buddha can offer profound insight. In the Buddha's view, loneliness is not a punishment. It is a symptom of emotional disconnection. In fact, loneliness is often the result of thinking that connection requires grand gestures or constant activity. But the Buddha taught that true connection does not require a full calendar or a busy social life. It requires presence. It's about showing up, even in the small moments. Ruth found this truth one afternoon when she decided to reach out to a neighbor. She invited her over for tea, and they sat in the warmth of the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. Ruth found herself laughing again, genuinely laughing, not out of obligation, but from a place of connection. That one small act, inviting someone into her life, sharing a simple moment, began to rekindle the warmth in her heart. The Buddha often spoke of the importance of loving kindness, metta, and in his teachings, he showed that emotional connection is not just about the people who are closest to us, but about reaching out, sharing, and making space for others. A simple phone call, a smile exchanged with a stranger, a conversation with a neighbor. These moments, though fleeting, are like threads woven into the fabric of life. Each connection, no matter how small, is a reminder that we are seen, that we are valued, and that we still matter in the world. In the end, the key to emotional well-being in old age is not to withdraw, but to engage, no matter how subtle or small the engagement may seem. Perhaps it's reaching out to an old friend, joining a group, or even just taking the time to listen to someone else's story. The Buddha taught that our hearts are like gardens. They flourish when we tend to them with care, when we nurture the relationships that matter. So today, I encourage you to reflect on your emotional connections. Who in your life could use a phone call, a visit, or just a moment of your time? Who can you reach out to, not for yourself, but to give the gift of presence? Remember, even the smallest connection can light up the darkest moments. And in connecting with others, you reconnect with yourself. 4. The habit of mental stimulation and curiosity. As the body slows, we often turn our attention inward, finding solace in the quiet and stillness that comes with age. However, this stillness can sometimes lead to a sense of stagnation, as if our minds, like our bodies, are slowing down and losing their spark. The Buddha often spoke about the impermanence of life, the idea that everything, including our thoughts and emotions, is in a constant state of change. Our minds too can remain sharp and vibrant if we nurture them with the same care we give our bodies. Take Leonard's story. Leonard was an 83-year-old retired accountant who had spent most of his life solving complex problems and making decisions that had real-world consequences. But when he retired, he felt an odd emptiness creeping in. At first, it seemed like a well-deserved rest. He spent his days watching television, reading the same newspaper columns, and simply drifting through the hours. But soon, something started to shift. His mind, once so sharp, began to feel dull. The days felt longer, and he found himself struggling to remember simple things. He started to wonder if this was just a normal part of aging, if this loss of mental sharpness was inevitable. It wasn't until his granddaughter gave him a set of crossword puzzles that Leonard began to understand something profound. His mind needed to be engaged. It wasn't about solving puzzles perfectly or racing against time. It was about reawakening his curiosity, his ability to think, to explore. At first, the puzzles felt difficult, but Leonard stuck with them. Over time, his memory improved, his mood lifted, and most importantly, his curiosity returned. Leonard learned that mental stimulation was not a luxury. It was a necessity for his emotional and cognitive well-being. Buddhism teaches us that our minds are like a flame. If not nourished, it can flicker out. But with the right care, it can burn brightly, offering warmth and light. Mental stimulation doesn't always have to come in the form of grand intellectual endeavors. It can be as simple as reading a new book, trying a new game, learning how to use a new app, or even asking questions you've never asked before. It's the willingness to engage with the world in new ways, to embrace the challenges that come with learning, and to push back against the comfort of routine thinking. The Buddha encouraged his followers to cultivate a sense of wonder and curiosity about the world around them. The path to wisdom is not a linear journey, it's a spiral of continuous learning and growth. The mind, like the body, can grow stronger and more resilient with each small effort. In fact, mental stimulation is a powerful tool for emotional resilience. When we challenge ourselves to think in new ways, we build the strength to face life's inevitable challenges with grace and insight. So, I ask you, what can you do today to engage your mind? It doesn't have to be difficult or overwhelming. Start small. Pick up a book from a genre you've never read before. Solve a puzzle. Ask someone about their life experiences. Every step you take to engage with your mind is a step toward greater mental vitality. And just as with physical vitality, each small effort compounds, leading you to a more alert, engaged, and fulfilled life. 5. The presence of self-worth and dignity. As we age, the world around us can begin to change in ways that make us feel invisible. Our physical appearance alters, our energy levels decrease, and at times, it can feel like the world no longer sees us the way it once did. People may speak more slowly to us, offer us help we never asked for, or assume we can't manage our own affairs. There can be moments when we feel as though we've been relegated to the background, as if we no longer matter in the same way we once did. But this is where the teachings of the Buddha offer us a profound reminder. Our worth is not defined by our physical abilities or the opinions of others. True self-worth comes from within, and it is based on the deep understanding of our intrinsic value, simply because we exist. The Buddha taught that all beings possess the seed of wisdom, compassion, and strength. Aging does not diminish these qualities. Rather, it allows them to grow and blossom in new ways. Take Carol's story. Carol was a 77-year-old former nurse who had spent her entire life caring for others. She had always been the one to offer support, advice, and a listening ear. But after a fall left her dependent on a walker, Carol began to feel the subtle shift in how people treated her. Her family spoke to her in softer tones, assuming she couldn't make decisions for herself. Strangers treated her as if she were fragile, and her once vibrant spirit began to dim. Carol didn't resent the help she received, but she missed the feeling of respect, of being seen as capable and valuable. She missed being treated as an equal. The Buddha often spoke of dignity, of respecting oneself and others, regardless of external circumstances. Dignity is not something that can be taken away by age, illness, or frailty. It is something we carry within ourselves, and it is something that is honored when we stand in alignment with our true nature. Dignity is also about how we treat ourselves. It's about looking in the mirror and acknowledging the wisdom, the experience, the love, and the resilience that we have accumulated over the years. Each wrinkle, each scar, each gray hair is a testament to the life we have lived, the lessons we have learned, and the strength we have shown in the face of adversity. When Carol recognized this, when she began to see herself not through the lens of her physical limitations, but through the lens of her worth and experience, she found her sense of dignity returning. It wasn't about defying aging, it was about embracing it, and in that embrace, reclaiming her value. She became more vocal about her desires, more assertive in making choices for herself, and most importantly, she remembered her worth. Buddhism teaches us that self-worth is not about external validation. It's not about how others perceive us or how much we can do in a given day. It is about recognizing that we are enough as we are, right here, right now. The true measure of our worth lies not in what we can do, but in who we are, beings of wisdom, compassion, and dignity, deserving of respect simply by being alive. So I invite you to reflect on this today. How do you treat yourself? Do you speak to yourself with kindness and respect? Or do you diminish your own worth based on what you think you've lost? In your later years, it's important to honor your story, to acknowledge the strength that has carried you through the challenges, and to remember that you are still a person of immense value. Your dignity is not tied to your physical strength or independence. It is tied to the wisdom and love that resides within you, always. 6. The feeling of being needed by someone or something. There is a quiet, almost imperceptible ache that grows when we no longer feel needed. It's not the loneliness that comes from being alone. It's the deeper sense of being invisible, of no longer having a place in the world. As we age, there may be times when we feel that the roles we once played, the parent, the provider, the caretaker, have faded. Children have grown and moved on. Friends have passed or drifted away, and suddenly it seems like the world is continuing without us. In those moments, the question becomes, do I still matter? Am I still important to anyone? The Buddha taught that the essence of life is connection, connection to others, to the world around us, and to ourselves. We are all interdependent, and our sense of belonging is rooted in the relationships we nurture. But as we age, those relationships can sometimes feel distant, and the roles we once played can feel like distant memories. Yet, the need to be needed, to feel as though our presence still matters, is a fundamental part of the human experience. Let me share the story of Frank, a man who had once been the cornerstone of his community. Frank had raised a family, built a business, and was a rock for everyone around him. But after his wife passed away and his children moved far away, Frank began to feel that his purpose had slipped away. The calls from his children became less frequent, the neighbors no longer asked for his help, and the vibrant sense of being needed, of being a crucial part of others' lives, began to fade. But then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a neighbor's young child came by after school, looking for Frank. She wanted to show him the picture she had drawn at school, to hear his thoughts, to share her day. It was a simple moment, yet it was transformative. Frank wasn't needed for grand things. He was needed for his presence, his wisdom, and his willingness to listen. That simple interaction, the kind of connection he had taken for granted in his younger years, reminded him of his value. It wasn't the big tasks or the overwhelming demands that gave him worth. It was the small, everyday moments of being needed by another person, by someone who valued his time and attention. Buddhism teaches us that the need to be needed is not about seeking validation or praise. It's about contributing to the lives of others, sharing our wisdom, our love, and our presence. It's about being an active participant in the lives of those around us, whether that's offering a kind word, teaching a skill, or simply being there when someone needs a listening ear. This act of giving, of being there for others, is what brings us back to life. Frank's story is a powerful reminder that even in old age, we are never truly invisible. We are always needed in some way, whether it's for a moment of shared laughter, a piece of advice, or the comfort of our presence. The Buddha taught that true joy comes from giving, not just in the grand gestures, but in the small, everyday acts of kindness. When we are needed, we are reminded that we matter, that we still have a place in this world, and that our lives are still meaningful. So, my dear friend, ask yourself today, who might need you? It might be a neighbor who would appreciate a phone call, a friend who could use a listening ear, or even a younger person who could benefit from your wisdom. You are not defined by what you've lost, but by what you can still give. The simple act of being needed, of showing up for someone else, brings life back into focus and reignites the spark of purpose. You matter, your presence matters, and that's the greatest gift you can give to yourself and to others. As we reach the later chapters of life, the question is not how many years we have left, but how we choose to live them. The Buddha's teachings remind us to look not at what we've lost, but at what we can still offer and receive. Aging is not about surrendering to the passage of time, but about embracing each moment with purpose and mindfulness. A purposeful routine, physical vitality, emotional connection, mental stimulation, self-worth, and the feeling of being needed. These 6 elements may seem simple, but they are the foundation of a life lived with peace and dignity. When these are present, our days are richer, more meaningful, and ultimately more fulfilling. The truth is, it's never too late. Whether you're 60, 70, 80, or even 90, today is the perfect day to begin rebuilding what may have been lost along the way. Start with small steps. One intentional action, one new habit, one heartfelt conversation. Remember, you are still needed, you are still valuable, and you are still capable of profound growth. You are alive, and your life holds immeasurable worth. As we reflect on this, I leave you with this question: what is one small change you can make today to start living more purposefully in this season of your life? Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If you found value in these insights, I invite you to subscribe to Quiet Wisdom and share this video with those who may need a reminder of their own worth and potential. Let us continue to explore life's deeper truths. Together, may peace and wisdom be your guiding light as you walk your path.